First, as we approach the 2024 election, New York Times bestselling author David Rubenstein looks back at past presidents and what we can learn from them as we head to the polls. His new book is called The Highest Calling: Conversations with the American President.
And David joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I'm wondering if the passage of time has given them a different perspective or maybe different opinions of how they did or what the job was like.
Of course, Harry Truman left the White House very unpopular, and now he's considered one of our better presidents. My former boss, Jimmy Carter, left the White House extremely unpopular, and today, while his presidency has been re-examined a bit, his post-presidency has made him a much more popular figure. So people tend to look at these presidents after they leave office much differently than when they were in office.
How about how the presidents see themselves, though? Like you tell the people who you talked to and what their perspective was.
I try to talk to scholars about presidents who no longer are with us, like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, so forth, Ulysses S. Grant, Dwight Eisenhower. And then I talked to a number of presidents themselves. I did the interview for the book Bill Clinton. I interviewed Joe Biden. I interviewed Donald Trump. I interviewed George W. Bush. And so I try to get the perspectives from the presidents directly, as well as the perspectives of scholars who had a chance to study these individuals.
I remember when Trump won, he looked shocked to me. Did you talk to him about that? Did he expect to lose? Because that's kind of where the needle was pointing at the time.
I don't think he would say he was shocked. I think he would say that he thought he was going to win, but I think most people around him thought that he was shocked. I just don't know that he would say that he was shocked. I have talked to him on many occasions, interviewed him on a number of occasions. I did for this book as well. But I think he entered the race as the only person in the history of our country who had never really had any contact at all in government. In other words, everybody else had either been a government official or a military official. He entered the race without any of the government credentials and became the first president of the United States without any government credentials at all. So it probably was a shock to most people that he could have pulled it off.
Talk about, we head to this big debate tomorrow night, and I'm just curious, the tone of the country seems so different and so polarized than it has been than in any of the administrations of even the presidents, the former presidents that you talked to.
Right.
But maybe you can compare it historically. Was it really bad like this back in the day, and we're just experiencing this now for the first time?
Well, remember, during the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was leaving Springfield to get to Washington, we had to take a circuitous route to get there because he couldn't go through any Confederate states. Some states had already seceded from the Union, and we ultimately entered the Civil War where roughly 3% of the population lost their lives. So compared to that, we're okay. Remember, in the Civil War period of time, there were 65 cases on the floor of the Congress, House or Senate, where members physically hit each other, in many cases very seriously. We're not having that now. But the country, no doubt, is divided. And I think it's likely to be divided for quite some time. As we all know, the election is going to get down to 5 to 7 states, and those states will decide the election. Illinois is a state where we pretty much know what's going to happen. It's going to be a Democratic state. Nobody really thinks it's going to be otherwise. The same is true of some of the other states like that.
Yeah, on that topic, you do hear voters complaining about the Electoral College. Is it an outdated thing? Do you feel like that's something that should maybe transition?
It was outdated for many, many years. I think right now it's sad, but we use the Electoral College, and it's very undemocratic. We've had 5 cases where people who got the majority of the popular vote did not get to be president. Most recently, for example, George W. Bush became president. He didn't have a popular vote. And actually, Donald Trump didn't have a popular majority against Hillary Clinton. She won the election popular votes by that 3 million. So it's not as democratic as we'd like. It was created because at the time, the founding fathers didn't trust the American people and didn't think they were intelligent enough to vote. So they came up with this electoral college system. I think it's outdated, but it's not going to change because you need 2/3 of each house to agree to change and 3/4 of each of the states to get a constitutional amendment to change it. And it's unrealistic at this point in time to do that, in my view.
What did you learn going into this from either your interviews with the former presidents or some of these historians about something you didn't know?
Well, I learned that everybody who becomes president of the United States is always intimidated by it. They want to be president. They try very hard to be president, But when they actually get the job, they say, how did I get this job? And they kind of look around and say,
Yeah.
what am I doing here? And so I don't think anybody who became president of the United States actually thought, boy, I'm really qualified and ready for this job. It rarely is the case that somebody takes that job and says, boy, I really know what I'm doing. I'm ready to go.
Knowing that both Harris and Trump are shooting after these undecideds in just a few key states, whoever those people are, what are your thoughts about what each of those candidates should touch on?
Well, on the debate, Donald Trump needs to make it clear that he is able to focus. He is able to really avoid some of the diatribes and kind of name calling that he sometimes gets caught up with. But if he does focus and talk about what he did do and what he wants to do, I think that can help him. In the case of Kamala Harris, she has to show that she has the gravitas and the seriousness to be president of the United States. And she has to show that maybe some of her positions are more moderate than some of the things she did when she was a senator or when she was in California as Attorney General. I think people are still haven't made up their mind. And as we know, this is going to get down to a very, very small number of states and a very, very small number of votes. George W. Bush became president because of 530 some votes in Florida in 2000. And so I suspect we'll have a very, very close election. The latest polling data suggests that.
Well, the book is The Highest Calling: Conversations on the American Presidency. For more, you can check out davidrubenstein.com and follow him on X. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.